Okay, so let's see. The next thing we talked about is shared spiritual languages. And we talked about this, defining our family values. So sitting down and talking with the kids about what we value, our common core values, what's important versus what's not important. We had a discussion with them on Martin Luther King Day, and we talked about what is good about a person and what doesn't matter about a person. And so they wrote things down like tattoos don't matter, race doesn't matter, status, money, those things don't matter. But what do they value in a person? Well, are they honest? And we just went through a list of common core values. That's important to do both in your marriage together and with your kids, because then you have a frame of reference to move forward with the family, and they know the values of your home. And that's not an LDS thing. You're teaching your kids to be good, moral adults. And so that's something that we've done. And, if you can, write it down and hang it up. And it doesn't, we've talked to a few different people that they've come together and they've written their own proclamation. And that seems to be really helpful for them. And we've done the same thing. So that's something that can bring you closer together as a family.
The Leah and Cody Young podcast talks about them doing that. This is something that I've been encouraging mixed faith couples to do for a few years now.
Yeah.
You may not see church doctrine or theology or history the same way, but there's still honesty, kindness, compassion, service, love, children, family, fun, joy, creativity, health, physical health, spiritual health, whatever, spirituality. There's so many things you do have in common, and there are so many things you can base a family on. Get clear on your family values. Get your kids involved in it, write it down, post it somewhere as your own family proclamation, and live by that. And that allows you as a couple to focus on what you have in common, and it gives you a direction and motivation as a family to unite and pursue something instead of focusing on all the ways you disagree and the things you see differently. Because at the end of the day, whether or not there were plates, whether or not the Kindred plates, this or that, polyandry, whatever the issue is, you're not going to build a life around that. You want to build a life around kindness and service and fun and joy and learning and education. And so until you get clear on your values, you don't even know where you stand. And so it's a super important thing. Values. All right.
Okay.
Absolutely. So be deliberate, taking action. That's where we're at, right?
Yeah.
So really what I mean by this is you can't be passive and think that everything is going to work out best. You have to take an active role in the raising of your children, in the fostering of a healthy relationship with your spouse. I think we may have mentioned this in our last interview. We've never been more, I'll use the term on purpose, religious about our family home evenings as a family since my faith crisis.
Really?
We hold very steady family home evenings, and we don't always sing the hymns that I'm not comfortable with, and it doesn't always have to have a prayer in it, but we have, and it is on Monday still, we have family home evening. And whether it's a motivational video that I've seen,
YouTube, like a TED Talk,
whether it's a TED Talk,
Brene Brown,
or it can be scriptures as well. We really want to take an active role in teaching our kids what we believe. And if there are differences in that, holding space for that.
I mean, just this last Monday, we moved into the new house and we have 3 bedrooms. And so 2 of the kids have to share a bedroom. So our family home evening was they had to think of the reasons why they get their own room, and then they'd have to present it in front of the whole group. And I mean, it's silly, but it's just one of those things that they're going to learn something in the process. And it's good for the family to hear out others' ideas and why they deserve their own room. So it doesn't, again, you don't have to do it the exact same way that you did before.
I love it.
Trying new things. We talked a little bit about this with the flexibility, but really the trying new things is try it. Just see how it feels. Katie did this with the Thrive Conference. I mean, the Thrive Conference was not easy for the believing spouse. And she wasn't the only one there. There was a number of mixed faith couples there, but that was out of the comfort zone.
Why was the thought of going to Thrive uncomfortable?
So I'm really good, like one-on-one interacting.
Yeah.
It is it's not in my nature to like stand in front of a group of people and bare my soul about everything that's going on. So that's really hard for me. I didn't know what to expect because it's a conference for post-Mormons. And so I didn't know if I would feel uncomfortable. And I didn't really actually know about the conference until Allan told me like a month before, and I hadn't agreed to it, and he had already agreed to it. So
it wasn't quite that deceptive.
it was fine. It's just I'm not.
It was scary.
It was scary. Yeah, I didn't know how what I had to say would be perceived by someone who was in the post-Mormon.
Yeah, what are
group.
all these post-Mormons going to think about a believer?
Right.
Are they going to be respectful?
Yeah,
Am I going to feel out of place?
Yeah.
How did you feel?
I felt great. It
Why?
was everyone was really wonderful. The people who attended our class were post-Mormons, but a lot of them had spouses who were still believing. And so I think what they were able to listen to and talk about was helpful for them. So that made me...
They were probably super grateful that you were there.
Well, I was really impressed by the post-Mormon spouse, the believing spouses who came to the whole conference
That was
with
so
them.
amazing.
I mean, I
Yeah.
give them major props and credit because that probably was a hard experience for them also. We joked because at the dinner, there was a dinner for the people who presented and then some of the people who attended. And I ended up in the hallway talking to a few other believing spouses. And Alan's like, it's like reverse congregation. All the
it's
non-believers,
sacrament
meeting. All the non-believers are inside doing karaoke and all the believers are in the outside chatting in the foyer. But it was a great experience. It was a new experience.
But you did something new and you were kind of,
And it goes the same way for the non-believer. Our ward asked me to, just last month, to be one of the coordinators for a day of service for the elders quorum. And I thought, yeah, I can do that. And so going around asking people in the neighborhood, hey, do you have any weeds we can pull or trees that need to be chopped? And meeting with the leadership to coordinate all of that was something that I was willing to try. And it was great. And it was super easy.
That's so cool.
Prayer. From a hopeful agnostic, how do you pray when every single time you get around the dinner table, there's a prayer that's going to be said? One day I just said, can I say it? And this was within the last 6 weeks or so. Can I say it? And Katie looks at me like, what? And I'm like, I'll say a prayer. So I tried to say a prayer. And it's really hard to say a prayer without directing it at anybody. But that's what I tried.
You just kind of start talking.
You just kind of start talking. Hey, yo. They've worked something like this, right?
We're grateful.
Yeah, we're so grateful that we're here today together as a family, this food. We're so grateful to have the time that we have together as a family. We're this house that we have. You're saying all the same stuff that you say in a prayer. It's more just like a
to the universe
vocal meditation. I don't even know what to call it, but and then I pulled one from Leah Young where I end in the name of unconditional love, and I think that's beautiful. And so I've done that a few times in our own family setting. We've had a few friends that have come over, and I said, "Hey, do you guys mind if I show you kind of what I'm playing around with as far as prayer goes?" And they're sure. Haven't quite done it in front of like believing family yet, and we'll see how that goes. But again, it's just try stuff, see if it's comfortable, see if it's not. If I would have really regretted not going to Katie's sister's mission farewell yesterday because of the bad experience I had at the baby blessing last month. Because I had a great experience at the mission farewell. We sang "God Be With You Till We Meet Again" in Tongan as a family, and it brought everyone, including myself, it brought tears to our eyes. It was a really beautiful moment, and I would have missed out if I wasn't willing to try.
Love it.
Let's. Do you
sorry.
want to? No.
Did I skip something?
Yeah, you did. So.
Double click. Here we go.
So I think the next slide is embracing the gray.
Yeah.
And I feel like we've really talked about a lot of this already. So it's not going to be anything new for everyone, but we talk about acknowledging the good. Allan talked about that. When good things happen on my side too, acknowledge that for your spouse. We talked about, you disagree with your own side. So Allan and I have always defended each other each other's position. So, for example, when I'm talking to a family member and they say things like, "Oh, well, you must be so sad," or how sad that he doesn't believe this anymore. I defend Allan and I say, I understand why he feels the way he does. And so,
or my husband's awesome. He's
Yeah.
amazing. And we believe differently, but I respect him and love him and think the world of him.
Right. And I let people know, especially in the ward or the neighborhood, that Allan is still an active participant with our family and teaching our kids. I defend him, and he vice versa. He defends me to really...
In the post-Mormon world, can be pretty
so
harsh.
if they're disparaging believers, they're disparaging who?
I just wrote they're disparaging her. I don't want that.
Yeah.
There was a post in one of the groups I'm in about gullibility, and they were saying, Mormons, it was a one-sentence post. Mormons are the most gullible group of people in the world. And I immediately took offense to that.
Yeah.
I was offended,
Why?
Elder Bednar. I was offended because... What are you talking about? I was a Mormon for 35 years. I wouldn't classify myself as gullible. My wife's not gullible. She's not gullible. So this was my response. Where is the line between gullible and indoctrinated? Now, some of the language I use, imagine this is a post-Mormon group that we're talking to. Is there a line there? I was raised in the church and taught to believe all of this by my parents from a very young age. I don't feel that makes me gullible. It makes me indoctrinated. When I see an 80-year-old man bearing testimony about the church, the word gullible doesn't even come to mind. I think, man, poor dude doesn't even know how indoctrinated he is. Then I think, that's super judgy of me. Homeboy seems pretty happy about things. So I even catch myself in using this term indoctrinated. I've seen these in our ward. It's quite an older ward. And I see these, I've caught myself thinking with testimonies being born by these older folks, like, man, they've just been trapped in this their whole lives. Then I realize they're super happy. How idiotic of me is it to point at them and smirk and say that they're wrong or they're this or that? They seem very, very genuinely happy. So when I come across people that are trying to point at the other side, my wife's side, and attribute some things that aren't fair to that side, I try to be just as vocal about criticizing that than I do criticizing the church if they do something that I feel is wrong as well.
Yeah, I love it. It's a very, you're inching towards a very successful mixed faith marriage when you're less defending your own turf and they're less defending their own turf, and instead you're fighting for their turf and they're fighting for yours. Mm-hmm. When a believing spouse says, you know what, just stay home from church. It's not good for you. It's not healthy, and I want you to be healthy. When the non-believer sticks up for believers. When a kid says, I don't want to go to church, and the non-believer knows it's important to the believing spouse and knows that at some level maybe it's good for the kid. The non-believer tells the believing kid that they should go to church and respect their mom. Or vice versa. If that arrogant missionary is speaking about their parent as a disappointment and the believing spouse says, you know what, your dad or your mom is a faithful, good, awesome person just because they're not in the church. When you're fighting to protect the other person's position, you're doing something really good.
Yeah.
I love it.
Well, see, the last thing is basically don't be what you hate. Be flexible, and when you admit that you're wrong. There's many times where I've come to a conclusion that was wrong, and I've had to apologize to Allan, and it takes practice, really. But again, that will just help you embrace some of that gray and realize that it's not just so black and white, especially for us Orthodox members.
Yeah. Don't be a know-it-all jerk.
Right. That's right.
Believer or non-believer.
Right.
Yep. Either way.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Trusting boundaries. So we're on to the next slide. Trusting boundaries. Take breaks so it's safe words. Take breaks from heavy topics. There's times.
What are the unsafe words?
Well, what we mean by this is.
If you need a code word, have one.
Yeah, and really, it's not an actual literal word in our case.
For
really,
some?
it's the idea.
So what do you mean trusting boundaries? What do you mean?
What we mean is set boundaries and trust them. So between us, our marriage is a lot more than just a mixed faith marriage. That doesn't define us.
Right.
It's something that, especially with a podcast and talking with people about it, and a lot of the date nights we go on are with couples from the podcast, it can feel very overwhelming. So many times we'll say, we're going to a dinner, then we're going to a movie, and we're not allowed to talk about. We're going to focus on our relationship outside of our religious
Don't
beliefs.
talk to
We're not
podcasts,
talking
don't
about
talk
it.
Mormonism.
I'm not going to be checking Facebook and seeing
Stay off
who's
social
posting.
media.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not going to be checking Reddit. I'm not going to be checking any of this. You're not going to be checking Instagram and listeners that are texting you. We're going to focus on us. So take breaks when you need them. That's why, I mean, it's July 1st, so we're almost breaking the rule now, but we're basically taking July off. We're heading to Georgia next week, and we're taking July off. We're going to enjoy our time with my family, and our podcast and religion is going to play a very, very minimal role, as little as we can make it.
But in the beginning too, when your spouse wants to tell you everything they've learned, and it's like it's a word vomit, right, of things that they've heard, and they want to discuss it. For the believing spouse, that can become overwhelming so quickly. And so there have been times where I've said to Allan, I will give you 15 minutes to say whatever you want to tell me, and give me the 15 minutes, and then just let me decompress and think about what you've said, and then give me time to respond to you. And that has seemed to really be helpful for me to just be able to, have these like small chunks at a time, because all at once can be really overwhelming.
I love it.
Yeah,
love it.
I've gotten to a place where I can wait for her to ask, where I don't feel like I need to go to her with, oh my gosh, guess what I learned? Or, oh my goodness, guess what President Oak said? Or whatever it may be. I'll wait for her to ask me of like, hey, what's been going on recently? And it really is on her. She learns at her own pace based on what she wants to do.
Yeah.
I love that idea of you're more than a mixed faith marriage, and not letting that define your marriage. I love that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and then the last slide we have that we wanted to talk about is teaching children. And we've gone through this we just talked about this, but one of the things that couples say all the time is, how do we introduce this to our marriage? How do we tell the kids that dad doesn't believe anymore, or mom doesn't believe anymore, and the other one still does? And this is a really can be a really rocky place to navigate it, especially with your children. So Allan and I laid the groundwork, and in the beginning we talked a lot about agency. So we would bring up super superficial examples, like we talked first about horror movies. I hate horror movies. I don't like the way they make me feel. Can't stand them. Allan loves horror movies. He thinks they're fun. So we said to the kids, this new movie, It, coming out, dad saw it and he liked it, but mom doesn't want to see it because she doesn't like stuff like that.
And we called it out. It's a rated R movie.
Yeah,
Our
we called it out.
At the time he was 10, he was like, isn't that rated R? And we went, it is.
Mm-hmm.
But I liked it. I thought it was great.
And I said that I didn't like horror movies. I don't like the way they make me feel good
when I watch them.
And then we said to the kids, who's right in the situation? Is dad right or I'm right? And it was our 6-year-old at the time that said, well, neither of you are right. And I said, why? And she said, because it's your opinion. And we said, that's what we want you to know.
Murray Public School System. Good.
So we've taught the kids early on that everyone has their agency. Everyone can choose for themselves. And if it doesn't hurt yourself or someone else, you get to decide. It's your opinion. And that really laid the framework for us telling them that Allan no longer believed. And we thought it was going to be this big event. And when we told them, they said, all right, is there anything else? I mean,
Can I go back to my room now?
It was a non-event.
It was okay, cool,
Can
whatever.
I play Xbox now?
Yeah, because it wasn't a big shock. And now every family dynamic is different. Our kids are 5 to 13. So older kids, that can be a little more difficult. We have to lean on people that went through that, because we have not been through that with older kids. I have to tell this story. I have to. So we were at a family reunion of hers last summer, and we met one of her cousins who ended up, after this little family reunion, sending her an email to our Marriage on a Tightrope email address saying, I found your podcast and I absolutely love it. My husband has never been a member of the church. He's Methodist. And we saw him at the reunion, but he was kind of to the side with a few of his kids. Big Polynesian guy, just tatted up, backwards hat, looks like this tough guy that like I didn't want to really converse with him, and shame on me for having that reaction. But then she talks to us and reveals all this stuff in this email, and we're like, we got to have you over for dinner. So I invite them over for dinner, or we invite them over for dinner, and they come with their 4 kids. Was that? No, 6 kids.
They have 7 kids.
7 kids. Yeah, well, it's been a while. So they come over with their 7 kids, and as soon as the door opens, it's this big Tongan man who could just destroy me if he wanted to. And that doesn't say much. I'm pretty.
You're not small.
Well, I'm not, but I'm a really big wuss. Ask anybody who knows me well. But he stands at the door, and he goes, "Kids, these are your cousins. Let's get inside and get on the couch. Everybody on the couch. We're going to take a picture." He's this big teddy bear. And the entire night, he was teaching me about Sadhguru, the YouTube channel, and all this wisdom. And I listened to this Buddhist podcast, and he has this not hair salon, barbershop. He has this barbershop, and he takes his 2 oldest kids to downtown Salt Lake twice a month to cut the hair of the homeless people. And he's telling me all this stuff, and I was blown away. It was like, man, these people. This man is one of the most kind, thoughtful people I've ever met. And the next day was family home evening. And it was
I talked about this while you were gone.
Oh, did you? The Martin Luther King Day?
Martin Luther King Day.
Well, that's what spawned it. Yeah. And that's what spawned it was the day before we taught this lesson of Martin Luther King of what makes you a good person versus what doesn't matter if you're good or bad. Tattoos is on that list. What religion you are is on that list. What is good is how you treat people, who you serve, what you give back. And it was all because of this wonderful man that I didn't want to get near at a family reunion just because of what he looked like. And It was really, really important lesson for me to learn.
That's a great story.
Yeah. And as we talk through some of these things, especially with what to do with the kids, we always discuss it as a couple first. But we don't always agree. So if we don't come to a conclusion. We come to a conclusion that we don't agree, and then we'll go to the kids and we'll put up the united front. We'll sit together and we'll say, okay, this is what we think. This is what mom thinks. This is what dad thinks. We actually disagree on this. Tell me what you think.
Yep.
And then the kids will be able to voice their own opinion. And it has completely transformed how we parent our children. And
that's the formula Natasha and I have been espousing in our retreats for a few years now. Mommy believes X, Daddy believes Y. Mm-hmm. What do you believe? It's such a healthy thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And believers can share what they believe. Non-believers can share what they believe. But most importantly, neither are, because the kids don't want to feel like they're being pressured, like they have to choose. What a kid should feel is they're being, it's Satan's plan, right? Mm-hmm. In the pre-existence. Yeah. Should the believing parent want to force the kids to believe something? That actually is against your religion, to force belief. And again, non-believers, you're a jerk if you're trying to make your kids. How are you any better than a church that you feel is controlling and oppressive if you're trying to force your non-beliefs on your kids?
Yeah.
Kids, and guess what? I have bad news for both of you. Kids are going to do whatever they want to do, period.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
So take that off the table. It's really beautiful. Mommy believes X, Daddy believes Y. What do you believe? And then the kids are going to believe different things. And again, at the end of the day, what that models is a family where it doesn't matter what you believe, it doesn't matter your politics, doesn't matter your religion, doesn't matter your sexuality. You're embraced and loved and accepted here.
Yeah.
It's a great formula.
And be prepared for life not to play that structured, because sometimes you're alone with a kid and he asks you a question or she asks you a question and your spouse isn't there to provide their side of the story. You have to provide some of their story or recommend that they ask your parent. It was less than a month ago, I was with all 4 kids in the car and they asked me, Dad, have you ever tried alcohol? Because one of the songs on the radio said the word liquor in it. And I all of a sudden found myself in the car without Katie to tell what she thought about alcohol. But I felt like gotta answer this question. I'm not gonna just say, hold on a second. So I told them what I felt. Actually asked them, like, why do you think I didn't try alcohol until just a few months ago? And my 11-year-old said, well, because you thought you no longer feel like it's against your religion. And I said, that's right. I no longer do. That's why I have now tried it. But guess what? you can't try it. You're a child, and you need to be older to be able to make that decision. Your mom doesn't agree with me. You really should ask your mother about this when we get home. It's those types of things that again, you can't control. I can't control when they're going to ask certain questions, but be ready to represent your spouse and then recommend that they talk to them when it happens.
And by all means, avoid this tendency where the believer's trying to sneak off and get the kids to believe, and the non-believers trying to have these secret conversations to undermine the belief. And then the other spouse is finding out about it, and the kids are, again, footballs in a war of contention between believer and non-believer. You're going to wreck your kids and you're going to wreck your family.
Right.
Just bring it all out into the sunshine. Believers get to share what they believe. Non-believers get to share. People in the middle get to share. But do it as a united front. Just like you said, discuss it as a couple first. Don't go behind your partner's back. Don't undermine that trust even further. Do it all together as a united front. And do it happily, where you're not scared about letting kids figure out what they think, where you're basically excited about letting them become who they are and figure out what is true for them, because they're going to do it anyway.
Right.
Yeah. You may as well do it joyfully as a family, because they're going to believe what they want to believe anyway.
Yeah.
You know, they are.
Do you want to talk about that last one, the explain appropriately to their level?
Yeah, we've tried to let the kids talk, just let conversations happen organically. So we are not going to bring up heavy topics if they don't ask, but two, if it's not to their knowledge or it's not appropriate for their level. So, I'm going to talk to my 5-year-old much differently than I'll talk to my 13-year-old. And they're going to have different questions. And so we just tailor make it to whatever kid we're talking to. And if it's something that they bring up on their own and they ask us questions, well, then we'll talk about it. But our 11-year-old is the one that's really more thoughtful. And so he'll come up with better questions, and we'll talk about it very openly with him. But, in no sense have we tried to push or force any information on for them. We just want to speak to where they're at and their own development, because that can just be damaging for them.
I remember wanting to explain multiple versions of the first vision, or, hieroglyphics and, Rosetta Stone and Kinderhook plates. And my kids were just like, they were too young and they didn't care. That's stuff that we care about, because we were raised in a Bruce R. McConkie world with truth claims are really important. A lot of kids just don't care about that stuff, or they'll care someday, but they don't care when they're 6 about who Fanny Alger is. Mm-hmm. So keep it age appropriate. Yep. That's so important. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. But what do you think, Katie? Should a non-believer be able to explain the fundamentals about church history prior to, let's say, a kid deciding if they're going to go on a mission or not, or get temple married? At some point, does the non-believing spouse have the right to make sure their kid knows the facts or the truth about Mormon history? What do you think?
Yes.
You think so?
I do. I think...
What if they stop believing? What if they lose their faith?
So Allan and I have decided that as they get older and as they ask questions and as we talk about things, if they decide to take seminary, a lot of times when they come home from church, Allan will ask them right off the bat, what did you learn today? Well, I learned about Noah. Okay, well, what do you think about Noah? Nah, there's no way that happened. I mean, our 12-year-old,
he was 12 at the time.
He was 12 at the time, said to us, there is no way that story is true. Okay, and
where would he put the whales, John? That's what he said. I'm like, well,
they're already in the water.
I don't think the whales need to be on the ark.
And Allan said to him, all right, well, let's say it's not true. Let's say that it's just a nice story. What do we learn from the story? What is it that you get out of the story? And he said, well, that you can do hard things. And Allan says, yeah, if you believe in something and you can do something that's really hard. And so I think that
also is... don't disobey God. Or
well, see, if you would have gone there, I could have had,
don't get on the wrong side of God.
Right.
No.
I could have addressed that, but he didn't come up with that. He came up with, if it's really hard, but you feel like you should do it, as long as it doesn't hurt other people. And technically, Noah didn't hurt anybody.
Well, some of the others did, but so I think that's the philosophy moving forward that we're going to have, is that if they want to come up with their own conclusions, they want to talk about it, we're going to talk about, well, why would we tell the story? what's important about the story. I think that goes with everything to do with the church. So if our kids come home from seminary and say, I just don't believe this is what they're telling us, Allan has every right to say, well, I've done some research and this is what I found. I think everyone has learned that keeping things secret or not telling them about it does damage. And so he has every right to say things to them. I have every right to give my point of view to them. And we're going to let them decide where to move on because, maybe it works for them and maybe it doesn't.
Okay, a couple final questions.
Yeah.
So, Katie.
Yeah.
I can see an Orthodox believer, and I know that there are some in the church that are even worried about your podcast. They're like, oh, it's a slippery slope because they're normalizing and making it okay to be in a mixed faith marriage. They're glamorizing a mixed faith marriage, and that's a slippery slope to apostasy, right? But also I can just see there are Orthodox believers that are out there. They're like, wow, Katie's really flexible. Katie's really reasonable. Katie's really working in the gray instead of the black and white or in the multicolor spectrum. But man, if I do that, it may be that my kids leave the church. It may be that I will leave the church, like believers may feel that way. There are probably some people saying, man, if I like Katie's mojo, but I'm just worried that if I become too flexible, everything's going to fall apart and everyone's going to leave and my eternal family is going to be destroyed. What can you say to a believer that's scared to take a more middle, flexible, compassionate, empathetic approach, a more reasonable approach? What would you say to an Orthodox believer that's afraid that it's going to lead to a slippery slope of everything unraveling if they're more flexible?
Okay. I actually don't know if you remember this, but you remember you came to our house last summer, and
of course I remember that. You made taco salad.
You made taco salad.
Remember that.
You had a phone call and you kicked the soccer ball around
with Rob Reynolds,
Yes.
Jen Reynolds' brother.
Yes.
Jen Reynolds' brother. So you came in and we talked about doing the podcast, and we talked about actually a lot of things. But towards the end, I asked you a question. I said, "What do you most commonly see happening in our case?" Do you remember what you said?
Yeah.
You said, well, generally what I see is that one spouse will eventually realize that their spouse was, they go down the same spouse. They're the same path as their spouse.
At the time, I was still attending, and so you kind of walked through the timeline of eventually that stops working for you. You have to stop attending. The wife or the spouse tries to hold on. It's very, very difficult, and they end up stepping away as well. The most common, you can say it in your words, most common.
But I also hope that I was careful to say that doesn't have to be the case.
You were.
But
you said you've seen every single possible outcome you could see.
Right.
Yeah.
But that does happen a lot.
That is the most common.
That was the most common.
You said.
Because it's hard to stay in this church, as a believer in a mixed faith home, because every Sunday is a reminder that your family's a failure, that your family's not in the plan. And over time, and it's hard to have your spouse not be there, and over time, that can wear a believer down.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to, so keep going.
It doesn't have to. And you gave a few other scenarios. You've seen people who it just didn't work, and so they divorced. And anyway, so you gave a few examples. And the second you left, I had a meltdown. I cried and cried and cried. And I said to Allan, I don't want that to be our story. I don't want to leave something that I love. I don't want down the road to see that I'm gonna we're gonna be divorced, or all these other outcomes we had talked about. And it was really hard for me to listen to your your experience. That was hard for me. And at the time, it gave me a little more determination, like, okay, we're going to figure this out and we're going to make it work. But I know that, like me a year ago, which is so many of the believing spouses, would feel the same way, right? Would feel like, I don't want my story to be that I'm just going to leave also, or that we're going to end up in divorce. So we got to find a way to work through these things. And so my advice to you would be to find, first of all, we talked about this, but your story is your story. You don't have to follow anyone else's. Allan and I, our experience is completely independent and different from so many people, you know, and so don't feel like you have to model your behavior or your marriage after something that we are doing. You do what works best for you. And that's what Allan and I have stayed true to, is what works best for us. And right now, this is where we're at, and it works well for us, but it doesn't work well for everyone, and that's okay. So find and decide, you know, after time, you'll naturally feel where you're supposed to be, where your heart's at. And wherever that is, let it just lead you down that path, because that's what was supposed to happen in your life and in your journey. It's everyone has their own journey. So I would say embrace the fact that you'll have a journey and that it'll look different from ours. So just because you listen or just because you relent, I think you embrace some of that gray, doesn't mean that it's going to look the same as us.
And for you, what's been the benefit of walking on the tightrope versus, you know, ending the marriage and not jumping on the tightrope?
Yeah, the paradigm shift.
What's been good about it? What's been
the communication, the tools that we've talked about that we gain because we're better equipped to deal with different ideas that are now brought into the marriage, how we raise the kids. All of that has helped me grow as a person and grow in our devotion and love for each other, in our marriage. And I wouldn't change that.
Has it been good for a lot of people say, oh, the kids will be confused. How has it been for the kids to have these open discussions?
Yeah, that's a good question. We did an episode with our 13-year-old and asked him these questions and said, how do you feel that Dad's out? Does it make you sad? Does it make you happy? And we talked through some of those things. And, you know, we were really worried about the kids being confused. And so far, it doesn't even seem to faze them. They have questions, they ask, we talk about it pretty openly, and just move on. So
I think it can make kids healthier, more sophisticated, more empathetic, more wise, because they have to deal with all the different ideas and perspectives, and they learn empathy and tolerance and compassion and unconditional love. And it really prepares them for the workplace that's going to have diversity of belief and non-belief and all sorts of diversity. We're better to learn how to deal with a diverse world than living in a diverse home.
Yeah.
Certainly.
We were at the dinner table probably 2 months ago. I was telling Katie a story of an email from a customer that I received that she was at home. A neighbor knocked on her door and disinvited her 8-year-old daughter to her daughter's birthday party because this mother had stepped away from the church and didn't want her daughter's bad influence at that birthday party. Seemed like the most ridiculous thing in the world. So I'm telling Katie, an 8-year-old's being excluded because they're no longer going to church. And I didn't know that our 7-year-old was actually really paying attention, but our 7-year-old daughter said, "That is so ridiculous." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, why is that?" She said, that's like me not being able to play with Dakota, one of her best friends, because he doesn't go to church. He doesn't even pray, Dad. He doesn't even pray. But I wouldn't be able to play with him. That's just silly. I'm like, we agree with you. And it's those types of situations that you find yourselves in that I'm like, I think our kid's going to be just okay because they're learning that some things they just don't matter. They don't have to matter.
So Allan, I'm asking you a similar question that I asked Katie. A lot of the non-believers are like, and we should have added a tip, don't use charged language. So words like cult, words like fraud, words like pedophile. Yeah. They may or may not be accurate. You may or may not like those words. Using them in a mixed faith scenario, not usually useful. Having said that, I'm about to use them, but in a respectful way. So there are some non-believers that in their mind, they're like, I don't want my kid raised in a cult, or I don't want my kid to be taught things that are sexually shaming. I don't want my kid to, be exposed to the brainwashing, which is another bad word you never use, but these are people's internal thoughts. What if they go on a mission? I don't want them to go on a mission. What if they end up marrying the temple and then I'm excluded? Like they've got all these fears that their kids are going to be destroyed if they're continued to allowed to have exposure to the church. How do you deal with those? Do you have those fears? And then how do you cope with them?
Not in the same, not as visceral as was the examples that you just gave. There's my only, I think the baseline of my fears are that my kids won't. No, that fear's even gone. I'm struggling to come up with the fear. Like I really want them to choose what's best for them. And when I look at my upbringing, I'm super grateful. This is something Bill Reel talks about. Like the LDS Church saved him. When he was a convert at about the age of 17, he was doing drugs, he was doing all this, and it really helped him a lot. The church really helped me a lot, and I will not deny that. A lot of people look at their mission as 2 years of the church had me lying for them, and I was just a salesman for a corporation selling Jesus. And I look back at my mission, and I absolutely loved it. I have zero regrets. I thought it was an awesome formative time.
You met Katie.
I met Katie. That helped. That helped quite a bit.
Yeah.
But I look at my upbringing, and I'm like, yes, were there things that I now look back on and say, oh my goodness. We talked about it in our first interview. Yes, there are those moments, but I'm conscious to those now. I talk to my kids. We've already actually, put a stop to one-on-one interviews with our family, and so that's not a concern. A lot of the things in the church that, honestly, I don't want to assign a percentage to it because that opens everyone to argue with it, but I would say there is a lot more good, healthy things about being in the church than there are harmful things.
It's even better now that Nelson's making all these changes. He's making all these changes that's making the church actually a healthier place.
Right. We were celebrating when he said, we want this to be more home-centered and let's study in the home. Because we're like, this is playing into what we want anyway. It was perfect because we want to be the ones delivering the message.
Yeah.
And so that's why, and Natasha talks about this too. And we had at our presentation at Thrive, we had a mother just with a trans daughter talking about how I will not let this my daughter go to church and hear all this hate speech and all this thing. And we looked at each other like, we should have Natasha answer this. And so we did. We had Natasha answer the question. She talks about that. She's just like, look, I don't want to put words in Natasha's mouth. That is a bad idea. But she talks about basically all the stuff that I just talked about. If you are not trying to protect your kid from everything they learn at school or everything that they learn online, why are you so caught up in worrying about every little thing that they're going to learn at church? Because if you are, you're going to deprive them of all the good things they can learn. If they decide not to go, I want to make sure that they are learning the good things they would have learned at church at home, or that they are putting those things into practice when they go to school. I don't know how else to explain it. It's just, I can't protect them from every single angle. I just have to make sure that we can teach them how we want them to value things.
Yeah. We give them the tools.
Yeah, I've heard Native Americans have sort of this allegory. You can't wrap the world in leather to protect your kids' feet, but you can put leather on your kids' feet, moccasins, right? We're not trying to make the world safe for our kids. We're trying to make our kids safe for the world. And that involves having them be exposed to different ideas, different thoughts, different perspectives. And that's how, especially if they come home and discuss it, and unconditional love is shown, that's how they learn to be sophisticated and wise and to figure out what they think and feel and how to sift through good and bad. And so whether it's public schools, religion, secular stuff, sports clubs, workplaces, what you want your kids are exposed to lots of environments, and your kids having active minds, figuring out what they think and feel, coming home to you, talking about it, and having a family culture where things can be discussed. They can make up their own decisions, and then they know they're loved no matter what. Yeah. And that's what I hear you saying.
Yeah.
And if they become missionaries and temple married, what are your thoughts on that?
Hey, we can have a civil ceremony outside, right?
But are you disappointed if they choose Mormonism as a path?
I don't think disappointed is the right word for it. Like Katie mentioned before with our 13-year-old, if he comes to me and says, Dad, I don't want to serve a mission. My question, I'm not going to say like, oh, thank goodness. Awesome. That's great. I was hoping you would say that. The question's going to be, why? Why do you feel that way? If he says it's going to be super hard and I'm really worried about being away from home for 2 years, I'll say, hey, I had the same concerns, and guess what? I got over it, and let me tell you how. But if he and I'll absolutely encourage him to go. If he comes to me, but I will have the conversation about the research and things like that. That's important. But if he comes to me and says, Dad, I've also done some of the research you have. I don't want to go on a mission. I don't believe it. I'm also going to be saying, well, you shouldn't be going on a mission if you don't believe it. So for me, it's all about what they value. Laziness is something that I hate, and I don't want them to exhibit it, even if it means that they will exhibit the same behaviors that I will, meaning I'm going to stop going to church because I'm lazy. I don't think that's a good reason. I'm not going to go on a mission because I'm lazy. I don't think that's a good reason. If they believe it, I'll help them overcome some of that stuff because I was there too.
I love it. And Katie, if your kids leave the church and spend their lives as non-believers, how do you feel good about that? Or how do you piece that together with your theology in the afterlife?
I mean, the same way I've done with Allan. Allan doesn't believe anymore. He doesn't know what's going to happen. I happen to think and believe that we will be together no matter what happens. A loving God isn't going to tear families apart in the afterlife. So I believe that we'll still be together.
And your kids, what about their souls?
And their souls will be with us. That's, I think, one part of Mormon theology that I can't bite into anymore. Is that
sad heaven is the way,
right? Yeah. Sad heaven.
Sad heaven.
No, a loving Heavenly Father wouldn't do that. So
you have faith that no matter what happens in this life,
that we'll be together.
That things are going to be okay.
Absolutely. And I think I listened to a podcast. It's called, what was it called?
Which one?
It's like if I can't even remember. Anyway, okay. Well, it doesn't matter. But all I'm saying is that I still think that whether you believe or not, in whatever religion, you're going to be with your loved one.
I love it. Yeah. Well, you guys are awesome, and I appreciate you letting me keep you a little longer than you planned.
Thank you.
How do people listen to your podcast?
So they can listen to us on Marriage on a Tightrope and the podcast .org. No.
Yeah, marriageonaTightrope.org is the website. Any podcast app will get you there.
The podcast app will get there. And then we're on Instagram at Marriage on a Tightrope. I run that. Allan runs the Facebook side.
Yep. Marriage on a Tightrope podcast group.
And then you can email at us at marriageonatightrope@gmail.com.
And how do they support you?
High fives if they see us in the street.
Yeah. I mean, with the money.
Oh, with that. marriageonaTightrope.org. There's a donate button about halfway down the page. You can click there. It can be recurring. It can be one time. Anything helps. And we literally are putting that all back into our effort when we get back from our break to create some local groups of mixed faith marriage couples because it's good not to feel alone locally.
I love it. All right. Well, Katie and Allan, I really appreciate you spending 7 hours with us on Mormon Stories.
Wait, is that the record? Who's the record?
10 and a half is the record.
Dang it.
Who was that?
Roger Hendricks.
Was that in one sitting?
No, it was in over 2 days.
Oh, 2. Okay.
But we're up there with Dan Vogel.
If you want to, if you want to stay a little longer.
No.
No, you guys are awesome. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your work. Thank you for being a beacon of hope. Thank you for supporting people, for following your passion, for your sacrifices, for your effectiveness, and for being willing to share in this little community of ours that has so much pain, but there's so much promise. You guys are a light of hope and a kind of like a lifeline that exists for couples that need help. And you're doing it, and we love you, and we're grateful for you. And we hope you'll let us know if we can ever help with anything you're doing.
Awesome.
What's in the future for Marriage on a Tightrope other than communities? Anything else? You going to keep doing it?
I mean, honestly, one last thing I would say is we have talked about having couples come on for more than just an interview. We actually are very open.
Other hosts?
Yeah, other hosts. We're very open to other hosts.
Is that because you're getting tired? Or
no, I think that a lot
I won't say anything.
No, I think that a lot of the value that is added is telling the story as it happens.
Yeah.
And as we kind of fit into a place where we are comfortable and there's not as much change happening on a week-to-week basis, that it would be very helpful for our listeners to have another couple's journey to listen to and another perspective. So if there are I'll just look directly at the camera. If there are other couples that would like to tell their story on a more long-term basis, let's talk. Message us and we'll talk about it.
And I guess, there are people who lose their faith in the church or leave it who come back and get rebaptized.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people who believe who leave. I know mixed faith couples that have swapped where at one point the husband didn't believe and the wife did. And then later the husband comes back to church and then the wife stops believing.
Right.
Yeah.
Like both return to church, both leave. So any of those, I guess with you guys, any of those things are possible, right?
Right.
Yeah, everything's possible. We don't, again, the destination is not written, and we're both open to either of those possibilities.
So Allan, if you come back to church, or Katie, if you stop believing, does that mean you'll have to stop being hosts?
No. And honestly, I don't want to paint a picture. No, it doesn't mean.
Doesn't this podcast need to be led by a mixed faith couple for it to be effective?
I think everyone's in a mixed faith, John. I think everybody is. And honestly, we don't have any plans to stop the podcast. Our own personal recordings of it. We don't want to belabor we don't need to go back to talk about the same issues over and over and over and over again. So we won't be repetitive on things. But again, I'll just circle back to that. Other voices are very valuable. So we love interviewing other people. We love meeting other people. We would love another couple to tell their story. Doesn't mean that when they start their story, we stop ours. But I think there's just great value in it.
And Katie, do you ever feel that pressure that you got to keep believing, you got to stay because you're filling that role in the podcast?
Oh, that's a good question. At first I did, but now I've kind of settled into what our new reality. And so I don't feel pressure to do anything. That's a really nice place to be.
So you're just taking it day by day.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. This is Katie and Allan Mount, everybody. The podcast is Marriage on a Tightrope, marriageonatightrope.org. Please support them. Thanks to Bill Reel for finding this lovely couple and sharing them with us, and Mormon Discussions podcast and all the great people over there. And you guys, please stay tuned. Support them. If you value, if you're a mixed faith couple and you want us to interview you, if you're a successful mixed faith marriage couple, we want to interview you. Email us at mormonstories@gmail.com. If you've reached out to me to be interviewed in this series, reach out to me again because I need to collect those names and make sure we line up those interviews. So look forward to several couples being interviewed on Mormon Stories, and we'll mention you guys every time because we want to promote that good work. So please do reach out, and we'll be doing more retreats and workshops for mixed faith couples and for couples and individuals. Check out MormonFaithCrisis.com for more information on those events. You can go to /events. But look for upcoming workshops and retreats. We're thinking about Chicago, thinking about Southern California, we're thinking about St. George, we're thinking about Southern Alberta. And if you want us to come to your area, please let us know. We would love to bring a workshop or retreat to where you are to help you in whatever you're doing. Hopefully we'll do some more mixed faith marriage retreats in the coming, maybe we'll do something together.
Yeah.
That'd be super fun with Natasha and
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
or Julie de Azevedo Hanks or all of us or Margie. We'll be thinking about that. Please support Mormon Stories. If you value this content, go to mormonstories.org. Top right, you can click on the donate button. $10, $50, $100 a month, whatever you can afford. It's all tax deductible. We're transparent in our finances, and all the money goes to keeping the podcast alive and towards providing communities of support and resources for people like you. Thanks for your support, and love you guys, and we'll see you guys soon on another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. Thanks to Cody Layton for the production, and thanks to all our listeners who shared their comments and perspective. We really appreciate you guys, and please spread the word. Take care, everybody.